Hello friends. So this video I'm going to be talking about the 3.2 contents. It's going to be an overview really quickly, followed by the meat of what I want to talk about is, the end game direction, and then followed by why we need to invest in the characters that are coming up or why not, and then talking briefly about portraits, maybe a little bit about future banners, and then material investment, and then lastly, I'm going to talk a little more about portraits and the general development direction this game is heading in, right? To give you sort of like an overview of the bigger picture that you won't really see just by playing or starting in 3.2 or playing in 3.2. So this is going to be relevant for players who've been playing about 2 months and beyond. This is all within a meta framework, so discussing mostly endgame related stuff, mostly to do with characters, not in the this is my favorite character because, story reasons, but, endgame or gameplay related stuff, right? So quickly going over the contents, you all know that this is a anniversary patch, so you're going to get a lot of free stuff from logging in. So the most important thing here is, I guess, the 5-star free choice that you get. Here, I would 100% recommend getting Corn Bloom if you don't have Corn Bloom, followed by Yenisei, and then the rest is just whatever up to you, right? In this current state of the game, investing into characters themselves that are 5-star, by that I mean like leveling them up or giving them resonance levels as well, not advised in the slightest. You can get away with using these characters in the particular reverie stages that you want to choose, even with them being at, level 30 or Insight 1 level 40 and so on. So there's not a huge requirement that you need to clear. So before you invest any materials, really take a moment because there's a lot of stuff that we need to be focused more on coming up. And then we have the mystery box that we get, the unowned 6-star character. It's a smart select. So anything that you don't have will be prioritized before giving you portraits. Obviously, you want to do this after you do all your pulls, generally, if you can wait that long, I guess, which means after your barrel pulls or your andro pulls or and finally your broom pulls, right? That's when you should be looking to open this up, right? Best chances of getting I guess, what you want. If you do have like a selection, you're narrowing it down a little bit. And then for this part regarding the raw jukebox, the important thing here is that you get to choose between one of three 5-star skins versus a 880 pure crystal drop coupon card, right? And you can use that for skins basically. And this is very important if you're going to be buying Anjanala's skin, right? You get a 880 crystal discount off the bat, which you can supplement with the seasonal roaring monthly, and then or the current in the shop right now, there's like some kind of like harvest festival thing going on where you pay a bit of money and then you get like 500 purple crystals and you get daily unilog plus a candy, I believe, right? So you can use that and substitute the remainder with the purple crystals that get reset. So they get the double up bonus when this patch drops, right? So you have multiple ways to fulfill, but the point is that you want to be holding on to this coupon if you're going to be purchasing a skin, especially if you're going for Anjanala's unique skin. Okay, and then we're moving on to contents, which is going to be mains bulletin. Right here, they sort of talk about the witness level and so on, but they don't really talk about the scaling in difficulty, and they're pushing this to be sort of like the pinnacle, one of the pinnacle endgame contents now. instead of what it was before traditionally, where the endgame enthusiasts really like to play this, right? But the majority of the player base would check out after getting their rewards, right? 850k points, and then you're done for the remainder of the patch. So this is a little bit different, where we have three different sort of point tiers, I guess. We have initially 5 mil that you want to hit for the majority of the rewards, and then 10 mil to get the extra bit of reward plus a little more witness level, and then 30 mil, which is going to give you the max amount of witness level. And these witness levels will carry over as these patches go by. So essentially, they're going to kind of be an indicator of your account's progress in a sense, right? I'll get more in depth about Maze Bulletin as we go on. When it comes to the carnival events, mostly this is just to do with the login stuff, the story progression stuff, doing the little activities that we have going on, and then you'll get rewarded. But most importantly, it's to do with the Full King's Parade, which is all about enhancement of your characters and getting rewarded with the resonant brainwave, right? I've already talked in depth about this. It's in that other video that looks like it's clickbait, but I assure you it's not clickbait. So you can, we have a couple more days left, right? We have under a week before this 3.2 starts, right? But this is still a good time to start saving for this, right? You can still make it and get your two brainwaves by the end of patch 3.2 if you start now. Okay, and then quickly, it's Critter Crash. They're gonna have new characters. They're gonna have like Marsha. They're gonna have Broom and Barrel, and so on. It's just an expansion of what we already know, and it's pretty fun actually. And then Syndrome of Silence is, they've already stated here, it's an update to the window to the other worlds. It's gonna be patched. We just got the CN patch where they have another set of rewards that we can, unlock through accruing points. So it's going to be consistently supported as these seasons go by. This initial season is going to last, I believe, about 70 days. Yeah, a really long time, actually. Look at it. But good to jump into and dabble away at like every week or so. Like you don't really want to burn yourself out doing this, but up to the player, I guess. And then the war room consistently keeps on getting updates because we're getting an influx of characters that Bluepock is going to be pushing onto us. So as a result, they need to provide a bare minimum, or not a bare minimum, I guess, but a minimum of materials that we can use to help us enhance, right? Our energy cap is, especially for free to play, is definitely capped to the point where they're going to be really split on what resources to be farming. So this is always going to be updated from here on out. And the snapshot Udemorian is something that I don't really engage with on CN because I haven't really even set this up actually. So it does look like it's nice to have, I guess, a nice little quality of life feature. But I don't really know too much about it. And then the new anecdote is Matilda's backstory, and she provides the new 5-star side cube, which is going to be a baseline or a staple for both the impromptu lineup, where the third support is going to be using that full time, regardless of whether it's Mercuria, Euphoria, Voyager, Euphoria Regulus, Euphoria and Lee in patch 3.3. They're all going to be using it, so you want to get your hands on this. Don't miss out on this one, and be saving your greeds for this as well, right? On top of that, it can be used for follow-up attack teams. So the only reason why this is sort of phased out, because initially in 3.2 everybody was using it, and then it was phased out because of the high survivability requirements that are being posed for endgame, especially like Maze Bulletin and type of thoughts, right? But it's still going to be used. Euphoria enhancements for Isolde, Anjanala, and Kala. The key takeaway is that Isolde is going to be a must. Anjanala is pretty much going to be a must if you already have her or if you're going to be pulling for her for the sake of playing with Broom. Kala is going to be a skip. I can just recommend that right off the bat without hesitation, unless you specifically like to play her. I'll get into my reasons in a sec. Reveries in the Rain doesn't really get much of anything. We get the second challenge for this boss and Voyages of Volatility, the bi-weekly reset, just happening 3 times. It's not really much of an endgame update for Reveries in the Rain. And the roaring jukebox, right? There's going to be 2 roaring jukeboxes that are going to be active at the same time. One is going to be entirely free, right? The free track as well as the premium track is going to be free for everybody. And then the other main raw jukebox, which has Kakanya's skin in it, is also going to be coming with the Ripples Decatone. So it's an insanely good value. One of the few insanely good value items for this patch. Yeah. So try to get it if you can, especially if you're going to be pulling for the Euphoria banner and so on. And then the skins, we have Isolde, Calabuana, and Janala. I mentioned before that you want to be saving your coupons for this in order to supplement the rest with your monthly seasonal that you're going to be buying, ideally, because it's going to be a third off, right? Instead of $15, it's going to be $10. So, and that's going to initially give you a whole bunch of crystals that you can use towards this as well. The past garments, we only get 6 garments. Cien actually ended up getting like 12 garments. So it's kind of lackluster in that sense, but you know, I guess they're keeping that exclusive status on global to an extent, right? We can't just have a skin release into a rerun right away. And the calendar system is if you miss out on a daily, as long as you have the monthly roaring active, then if you finish a weekly, you get these like little tokens that you can use to claim that those clear drops back, I believe. Right? I haven't actually been able to use it yet, so I don't really know, but I think that's the general gist of what's going on here. Okay, with the content sort of overview out the way, we have to start talking about the endgame direction, right? In order for us to kind of analyze why we need to pull for these characters, we have to sort of talk about the direction the game is heading in. So Main's Bulletin becomes the sort of pinnacle endgame content in patch 3.2 and moving forward. I don't know exactly how long for, but this, for the time being, this is going to be how it's going to work, right? Reveries in the Rain and Wailing Well is done for the time being, and then this is their sort of like premiere, I guess, right? The reason being is that Main's Bulletin is super accessible, right? So anybody that's started within the last month or 2 can jump into Main's Bulletin and directly see a reflection of their account's progress, especially so if they are pulling on that patches banner and so on, right? Whereas with Reveries, you would have to clear from 0 and dive into all the way down to 1,000 meters and beyond, right? So that is completely different in terms of the amount of accessibility that this brings, right? So when it comes to the scoring system, I've graded here that 5 mil is casual, 10 mil is endgame, and then 30 mil is hardcore. By casual, I mean that you can use any archetype, afflatus or non-afflatus, and be able to hit 5 mil with Insight 3, Resonance 10 as a baseline, right? As long as you're not afflatus disadvantage on, like, say your main character or something, then main DPS, then you're gonna be fine to hit this amount. And 5 mil unlocks pretty much all the rewards for you anyway. And then 10 mil is what you want to get for the witness level, as well as all of the items in the shop or the reward. And then 30 mil is an extra amount of EXP towards the witness level as well. And endgame, I would say, is a baseline of having the afflatus positive archetype, especially the ones that they're promoting for this patch. And then on top of that, should be around Resonance 13, Portrait 0 as a baseline, level 60, obviously. And then for 30 mil plus, it's going to be not full levels of Portrait investment. I would say P2 baseline and Resonance 15 A5 side cubes as sort of like the baseline. And then going beyond 30 mil, breaking 30 mil is going to be, like towards the 70 mil range is going to be fully P5 team and so on. So talking more in depth about the sort of bosses that are coming up for Mains Bulletin, we can see that it's double spirit into one plant, double spirit into one plant, and then for patch 3.4, it's going to be star, plant, and spirit. And there's going to be a recycling of these bosses, so you can tell immediately that Beryl is going to have an extremely long longevity when it comes to Mains Bulletin, starting from 3.2 onwards. This is Alepht's sort of boss, right? It's a single target fight. You get a debuff if you're just constantly just spamming AoE. So this is the Corvus favored raid boss. She really excels at this particular raid. And then we have this middle guy here, which is specifically designed for Broom. And this is the, I guess the baseline that kind of like shook the Bluepock devs or the QA, because it can be, Broom can be sort of, her cycle can be manipulated alongside Anjanala, and as a result, at P0 investments, you can see Broom do hit 30 mil pretty handedly on this particular fight here. So because of that reason, they designed this new boss for 3.3 and 3.4 as well. So what this boss's mechanic is that he goes into a spirit afflatus status after 3 rounds for 1 round, and that's where you can dump damage into him. But for the majority of the fight, he's just going to stay plant afflatus. So it works pretty decently with Igor, but they intentionally designed this boss because Broom's main source of attacking is through channeling her follow-up attack, right? And they designed this boss to have this affliction, basically, which is a channeling interference, right? It's an affliction that has 3, you can stack it up to 3 times, and upon hitting the 3rd stack, you gain stun status for 2 turns, and it cannot be dispelled, right? This was initially created for the release of Marsha plus Igor, so it's a perfect fit for the both of them. There's 2 ads that you need to burn. Otherwise, he puts up a blood array that's going to disrupt any of your existing arrays and so on. So that AoE is very important, but Broom, inherently has that sort of AoE attached to her follow-up, and this is intentionally designed just to prevent Broom, right? So Broom only gets good performance in 3.2 when it comes to Mains Bulletin. Tide of Thoughts is another matter entirely, and Wailing Well and Reveries, she absolutely dominates in those 2 fields as well. So when talking about Mains Bulletin, I cannot not mention Corvus, right? So I just did a test a few hours ago where I just went in with a Resonance 10 no frequency level 60 Corvus with 3 level 30 partners Marsha, Flutterpage, and Karen, and I'm easily able to hit 12 mil if I was, using Resonance 15 on this P0 Corvus, keeping everything the same. I would be able to hit 20 mil pretty easily, right? So that kind of gives you an idea of Corvus's strength in these raids. Corvus can also be used for this first boss, as well as this plant afflatus boss, right? I told you that it switches afflatus to spirit every 3 rounds, I believe. So as long as she has AoE to deal with the ads that are spawning or that are part of this boss's mechanics, that are part of this boss's mechanics, and that's through having a high portrait level Karen, right? Not everybody's going to have it, but it is how you can overcome and use Corvus to absolutely dominate in basically, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mains bosses over the course of 3 patches, right? So Corvus remains a viable option. I know that in my review, I said that I'm not going to be pulling for Corvus. I did end up pulling on Corvus on 2 accounts, both P5 for the specific reason. I don't know that I can recommend that to, anybody that is not interested in chasing scores for mains bulletin. But when it comes to just having that option to take out this boss easily, then Corvus at P0 is something that you can consider. We still have a couple more days where her banner is still going to be active, right? And then 3.4, the Starflatus boss is purely going to be for Paper Heron, basically, right? And then moving on, right? I'll get more into mains bulletin later down the line. Tide of Thoughts is a mode that comes out in 3.3, right? Initially, this is a very sort of grind intensive mode, but because there's a lot going on over in CN where a few of the gacha companies were EOSing, I guess the time for something like this to be controversial was not good for Bluepox. So they ended up, what they ended up doing was they announced on their alt Bilibili account that they're going to give all the sort of the Voyage shop materials for free. On top of that, they're going to unlock all of these sort of affixes as well. These other like purple and blue ones you have to actually grind yourself, but these sort of beneficial affixes that you can attach onto your group is automatically unlocked. So how it works is that they had all these sort of requirements, right? And here, if I was to like randomly click on go here, it would show up as these two. And then I would have to use these 2 affixes and attain 1500 points in order to unlock the 50 points, which is going to accumulate into this little track here. You can see I'm 500 out of 500 without doing anything there. So that is going to be reworked in 3.4. Whether or not we get something like that in 3.3 remains to be seen. Because I'm sure they wouldn't release something that they intend to revert anyway, just out of sheer laziness. I'm sure they will give us sort of the updated version of it. And on top of that, they're going to make these sort of initial challenges be a little bit more manageable, because this is mostly on the high sort of endgame spectrum in order to be able to do this. But there is that advantage of the 2 banners that are coming up to do with Broom and Barrel being extremely strong contenders for this mode, right? What it is you basically take these affixes, slot them in, right? There's 3 that pertain to the bosses, and then 3 that you can additionally customize, or 5 that you can additionally customize to strengthen the boss. And that's going to increase or decrease the amount of points. And then you go in and kill it, not taking terribly long, right? It starts to sort of decay after like 13 rounds, but as long as you're within that sort of range, it doesn't decay all that much. So that's where the difficulty kind of comes from. This isn't a mechanically intensive fight because you're basically customizing it the way that you want, and there's two different fights that you fight back to back. You can reset the fight when you go to the second fight, but if you were to drop that fight, say that you had to like, you know, close down the game or something, right? And then they don't have a way of you re-entering it, so you have to do the first fight again in order to go ahead and challenge the second fight for the total pool of points. But getting a little long-winded, the difficulty comes from the damage output of this boss, right? Initially, it's not too bad, and then as you're stacking more points and more affixes onto your boss, that's when it starts to really just hit like a truck. And this is where the sort of baseline for 3.2 and beyond is established, right? And I'm not talking about portraits. I'm talking about sort of like the resonance baseline. How we currently have it is we're at resonance 10, and there are people that don't even do frequency, right? Resonance 10 frequency is considered the baseline at, you know, hovering between level 30 and 60. But now it is definitively level 60, resonance 13, A5 side cube is sort of the baseline if you want to be tackling Tide of Thoughts, right? So I explain here that 2000 is casual, where you can sort of play around with the white affixes, and as long as you're using a decent team and your flat is positive, you can get 2000 pretty easily. And then 3000 would be considered more endgame, where you need a baseline of resonance 13, P0, right? And then hardcore 4K and beyond would be considered hardcore, where you have at least, you know, I would say a minimum of like P2 and beyond investment for your main DPS. The only exception to this rule would be Broom here. Broom can get away because her DPT alongside Anjanala is so absurd that they can get away with much lower portrait levels. Instead, they still have to be resonance 15, right? So this is the resonance 15 baseline with several portraits, and then this is the P0 baseline with resonance 13, right? Okay, so in talking about the endgame, we can kind of move on to talking about the banners, right? When it comes to Beryl was, I was on the fence about Beryl because initially when I made my my 3.2 pool plan video, my most recent one, it stated that you know, we have to wait and see until what kind of character Marsha is going to be before we commit to Beryl full time. And Marsha ended up being the releasing as the best healer in the game, regardless of her position as a lingering glow healer. So in that sense, Beryl at P0 is a must pull if you're going to be pulling for Marsha, because you just inherently have that benefit of having this archetype that you're going to be using for these two endgame modes, right? And anything beyond P0, I'll talk about more in my review for this character, but in this current state of the game, which I'll be talking about here, I would say P0 works just fine as long as you're willing to make that material investment into her resonances, right? Resonance 13 or 15, depending on how many materials you have. She is an exceptionally strong character even at P0, just the way things are. Okay. And then Broom. I sort of touched on Broom when it comes to mains bulletin. She is limited. They intentionally hamstrung her for a reason because, you know, it wasn't really an intended mechanic, but it did end up making a lot of people pull last minute. So what happened was Broom released people were still making their minds up about Broom, but then there were still about 4 days left on Anjanala's banner. And as soon as we found out the Moxie engine alongside Broom and Anjo and how they work together and synergize together, that's when people started heavily pulling for Broom and Anjanala both. So they can't retroactively go and turn that switch off, especially in CN. And for us, it's not going to be a thing either. So moving forward, Broom is going to be the best P0 investment that you can make at this current time, and probably for another, at least until like 3.5, she's going to be the best character to make a P0 investment on. And what I mean by that is because of her high DPT, you can use her to clear basically the majority of the content in the game, whether it's anything excluding those few mains bulletin levels that I was mentioning. She basically dominates in as a P0 character. You still want to raise her to, Resonance 13 as a baseline, as I discussed before. So have Broom in your pull plan, whether or not you have Isolde for Beryl, or Karen for Broom, or Anjo for Broom. It doesn't matter because they're getting reruns anyway. We already know that in 3.4, Anjo's getting a rerun alongside Broom. Well, Broom's not getting a rerun, but Anjo's getting a rerun, and then Karen will follow suit, at least for global, right? We're not getting Karen as a rerun just yet for us. When it comes to Beryl and Isolde, I mentioned Isolde because, the pull economy might be tight for you. So Isolde is going to rerun on the Euphoria banner 3 times in a row, I believe, in 3.2, 3.3, and 3.4. I think she might not be in the 3.4 Ripples banner, but she is in the free 100 pull banner as well. So that's where you can get her. Ideally, you would have like 180 cassettes on you of those golden cassettes, and then you can get the remaining like 60 golden cassettes by pulling for Beryl and Broom in patch 3.2 and be able to get Isolde that way, right? And then talking about the 3.2 Ripples, we have all of these characters. I love these plant affiliates characters to death. And then we have Ezra here, who's always sort of like the sidekick. The only character you should be concerned about is Isolde, right? If you don't have those cassettes, if you still want to be playing and getting the most out of your Beryl in 3.2, you need to have Isolde, right? She is a core component of the Lingering Glow archetype. How it works is that you have Halo and then you have Burn. The only provider of Burn is Isolde as a baseline, and that's how Flutterpage, that's how Fatutu can apply Burn. Otherwise, we can't generate Lingering Glow, which means Beryl can't use her follow-up attacks, right? So Isolde is a must to be playing this archetype. This is the only character you should be concerned about if you're going to be pulling for Ripples on the water, okay? Kala should not even be entertained, because the thing is, I guess I'll go there. Anjanala as a follow-up attack main DPS, right? She's essentially the main DPS as opposed to being a sub DPS when combined with Kala. She just doesn't have a viable environment to be worked in, right? You're going to use Anjo for this plant boss and then nothing else, right? If you're going to be just sticking with Anjo and Kala. So there is no reason for you to be pulling for Kala unless you're, I guess, really excited about her or still doing like reveries. Maybe you still need a specific Starflighters character that you need to choose with. I'm really struggling here, but there's no reason because she's part of the Euphoria banner anyway that you can borrow from. There's really no reason to be pulling for her. She is a she's going to put a dent in your pulls for no reason. She's not going to be viable in Tide of Thoughts either, is what the point that I was trying to make. Boon of the Water. Okay. Uh, Boon of the Water, number 5. We talked about here, right? Here I said Kiparina is better than, either it's going to be Mercuria or Barcarola. Um, if you have Kiparina and Aleph, and then Hizabeth and Flutter Page and Fatutu, right? Now that we see the endgame landscape, given the time that has passed and 3.3 and so on, the only characters that you should be pulling for, while considering the fact that Mercuria got a good Euphoria update, she got a Euphoria update in the sense that she is a main DPS, right? In order to effectively use Mercuria's Euphoria, you want to be playing her as a pseudo DPS, right? She retains the same role as she initially had on the impromptu incantation team. If you just use her as a buffer, right? Nothing changes. Her buff lasts 1 extra turn. That's it. And so for that reason, unless you have a really high portrait investment already, there's no reason to be picking up Mercuria for this specific banner. And this banner can apply to 2 types of people, right? The first type is you don't have any of these characters and you need these characters. This is like literally the best banner that you could be pulling on in this game, right? There is nothing that you lose your 33% to, right? Outside of these other characters that you pick. So Kiparina, Fatutu, Flutter Page, if you don't have them, you need to be pulling on this banner and making sure that you have enough unilogs for this banner, right? When it comes to higher levels of investment, by that I mean portraits, or maybe you don't have Kiparina, but say that you have Flutter Page P1 and Fatutu P0, right? That's a common case for a lot of people. You would still pick Kiparina, Fatutu, Flutter Page. They're all going to be used, right? Fatutu is going to be consistently used with Broom, Flutter Page, or Broom, Igor, and so on. Flutter Page is literally, one of the highest usage characters in this game, and all the way until 3.4 and beyond, probably, right? That's just inherent with the game design focusing heavily on follow-up attacks, right? So Flutter Page, P1 is great, and then P2, P3, P4, P5, they're all good portraits, right? P3 is a good one, and then I believe P4 would be kind of where you would stop at. P5, I believe it's just to do with her own personal damage. I forget. Kiparina is basically in the same boat, right? P1 is good, and up to P4 is great because we're looking mostly at survivability when it comes to pairing with Kiparina. Her buffs get much better with her portraits, and I'm going to get a little too long-winded here, but if you're chasing portraits and you have an excess amount of pulls, this is actually a decent banner to be pulling on if you don't have those fully invested Flutter Page, Kiparina, or Fatutus, right? Okay. And Janala, I just talked about her to an extent. The reason why you want to pull for Anjanala in 3.2 is to be getting use out of her Broomnala composition, right? She gets a rerun in patch 3.4, so she isn't exclusively limited as things were before, right? I hope that this is a trend that we kind of see going forward, and I hope that Global kind of adopts this like standard banner structure as well, instead of getting really weird schedules. In a sense, I don't believe that the split banners, the yearning banners, really accrue as much revenue as they think. If they were to actually present a banner schedule that people can follow, then you wouldn't feel as bad, especially as a newcomer. You wouldn't feel as bad by missing out just on the prior patch, right? You still have something to look forward to. But instead, what happens is that you miss out, whether through lack of pulls or just not playing the game at that moment, and then you pay double for essentially what you wanted, right? So that doesn't feel good for anybody, and I don't think that helps with player retention in the long run. So I would guess at best it breaks even. But for the overall health of the game, if global and it's surrounding servers like Korea and Japan, they all followed the suit, I think this game would do much better. Okay. And then lastly, the 3.2 standard banners, we're getting a rerun for 6, who is also getting a Euphoria update in patch 3.4. And as part of the Boon of the Water notice, they put that we're getting as standard banner units, we're getting Spathadia, Tooth Fairy, and Ulrich, right? Now I just want you I just want to draw your attention to my prediction here. I made this like useless freaking list. I thought nobody was gonna look at it, but I put it in here anyway, and then I kind of corroborated what would happen. Look at my prediction, dude. This Spathadia, Tooth Fairy, and 6. Also likely candidates for Euphoria 3.3. But anyway, none of these characters you need to be pulling for or entertaining pulling for, because you shouldn't ever be pulling for the future in this game any longer, right? Unless it's a designated support character that we know is going to have this crazy uptime like Flutterpage, which is going to be even fewer and far between going forward, right? Because they lose revenue by making characters like that, but they do make sure that everybody wants to be pulling for that character. But they're not going to be making universal characters or supports in particular like that going forward. So the reason to be pre-pulling, especially on the global version, really isn't there any longer. Okay, we're going to be starved on pulls as opposed to having an influx of pulls going forward. Because every banner pretty much is going to be, I should be entertaining pulling for this character going forward. Lastly, I don't know how long this portion is going to take, but this is kind of the reason why I wanted to make this video, right? Lastly, I'm going to join the portrait portion alongside the game direction portion. Okay. When it comes to longevity versus the life cycle in this game, we talk about those two things, and we really like to talk about portraits in this regard. We compare the strength of a character to being able to use them kind of for this like imagined period of time. But in reality, what's happening now is that the actual life cycle of these characters don't really go beyond 3 patches. Okay, whether or not it's a limited character, whether or not it's a collaboration character like the AC collab, these characters and their life cycles don't really extend beyond the 130-day mark, right? So no matter the investment level that you put in, while you may get usage out of them, right? As we've seen above, where we have like mains bulletin being the pinnacle endgame content, right? Eventually, we're going to get phased out of the Afflatus rotation, and they're going to cycle in, the current day patches character to be, favored, right? So as a result, unless it's this character that you have this strong affinity for, right? There's no reason to be pulling like intensively to the detriment of your account's future when it comes to portraits any longer, right? When talking about limiteds versus standards, you already know that limiteds kind of have a longer shelf life than a standard character. This is pretty much true for all the archetypes that's come in the past. I guess the exceptions would be like um, impromptu incantation and then Corvus, right? Corvus is going to see usage for basically 4 patches, right? From this patch, this current patch 3.1 onwards. And then impromptu incantation kind of released in that window between 300 meters and 400 meters. And they've just dominated the Starfleeters this whole time. So ever since, Reveries kind of was pushing further and further along, that's where you would just bring your impromptu incantation team, right? Outside of those scenarios, and moving forward, we're not going to have crazy longevity on, say, a main DPS. Main DPS standard character. Okay. When it comes to limiteds, they're going to get support because they design their sort of banners and characters around the limiteds, right? A limited comes out, and then we're going to get at least one new character pertaining to that limited in the following patch. And then the last character is soon to follow in the near future, right? That's what we can kind of surmise. I believe that Blood Tithe was an exception to this rule, and they learned a lot about Blood Tithe because what happened was, say that you missed Nautica, all these Blood Tithe characters that came out really didn't see the light of day for those accounts that were unable to pull on Nautica, right? If you were to end up with an account that only has Semmelweis, Sentinel, and Robuska, then you're really just kind of hamstringing yourself there, right? So very few people end up doing that, and as a result, they can see a trend in sort of the keeping this long character release pertaining to the limited character and following the limited character's release, right? So as a result, I think they're switching it up to be the sort of like one Euphoria character is going to be core, and then followed by a new release character pertaining to that archetype, and then in the next patch or two, there's going to be another character that may or may not come, and then you can see the sort of overall results of your investment, I guess. When it comes to envy and homogeneity, I put this here because I was thinking about why we pull for portraits, right? In the past, prior to this patch, I guess, or prior to 3.2 that's coming up, we pull for portraits because we make this sort of argument to ourselves, right? Whether or not I want to go deep on this character and heavily invest really depends on the environment that I'm associating myself in, right? That's, I guess, one way to put it. So by that, I mean, if you're constantly hanging out on Discord or Reddit and people are talking about, P5 this and P5 that, or P2 this, and I got this score, and you eventually want to kind of mirror that output, and you're sort of like your mental fortitude is weakened, right? To the point where what you're doing, what I see a lot of people doing is, hey, talk about this guy's portrait for me, right? Really assess this guy's portrait. And that's, in a way, that's to reaffirm they've already made up their mind as to, oh, I want to invest and try to go all in, and maybe I'll get lucky. And those are the three kind of like reasons as before a player goes down that slope, right? And then you start asking Reddit, Discord, YouTube comments, whatever, like, okay, is this good? Is this good? Did I do good? So while that was fine in the past, because the pace of the game was slower, the problem is that there's not much that comes out of being that sort of like 10 percentile unique player that has a P2 invested character or a P5 invested character any longer. What does matter is that you meet the threshold or the baseline in order to clear these contents at the desired level that you want, right? But then again, I reiterated that if you're not pushing for the absolute pinnacle, right, within the top 10 or the top 100, top 50, then don't do it, right? A lot more eyes are going to be looking at the mains bulletin scores going forward. And a lot more eyes are going to be looking at Tide of Thoughts scores going forward, but to a lesser extent. And the reason is that it's way more accessible to compare and contrast yourself and your investment, your gameplay, all of the above when it comes to a new release archetype, right? And this is one way that Bluepock is able to promote people into pulling, right? Getting people to pull through the sort of like peer pressure environment is a tried and true method, right? When it comes to gachas. So what you need to do to prevent this is to just understand that there is a baseline that these developers create environments based on. Okay. And as long as you can meet that, and as long as your understanding of the character or the archetype is knowledgeable enough, then you'll be fine to be able to clear at a, what did I say before here? An endgame level, right? Hardcore I would reserve for, dolphins or whales, right? Disposable income, then you can start to go for those levels, right? But then bear in mind that you want to do it in a way that's you're going to see the most benefit, right? If you come at the tail end of a character's life cycle and decide to go all in on that character, then, that's not going to be beneficial in terms of what you're getting out of it, right? So those factors you do want to consider. And then when it comes to this bullet point, supports versus main DPS, it's pretty straightforward, right? In reverse, we have this understanding, this inherent sort of rule that we like to tell ourselves as well as newer players that investing in the main DPS is what you should be doing. But the thing is, this sort of way of thinking is now phased out to an extent, right? There is a baseline level of DPT a character begins with, and then the rest is backed up by the support infrastructure of that character. Whether it's a sub DPS composition, or it's a main DPS and 3 support composition, it doesn't matter. Like, supports end up having the most amount of longevity in this game. And therefore, if you're going to invest into anything, invest into a good support, right? When every one of you that's still listening right now need to be thinking about making sure that you have pulls for Marsha. And it's extremely important, okay? Those are some of the things that you need to consider going forward, where they're going to release newer and newer archetypes. We're at the beginning of the year. Think back to 2025 at the beginning of 2.0, right? And then think towards the end of 2025, where we start to get characters like Broom, Beryl, Igor, Marsha. The level of compression that's transpired between this gap in time is tremendous. the amount of content that we've gotten, and in terms of what Blue Park wants to label as endgame content, is also pretty hefty as well. So the whole landscape is going to change. When you're hedging your bets at the start of the year, you're, especially if you're really going deep into something and you're going to cripple yourself in doing so, you need to have the most amount of information possible to make that decision and to do it properly. Otherwise, it's just, you're just throwing things away. I kind of touched on the raid meta and the baseline. We're moving into a raid meta, right? Non too difficult boss fights, right? That are largely single target focused. Corvus doesn't excel in an environment that isn't purely single target because she doesn't have any supplementary AoE inherent to her kit, right? The only way that she gets AoE is through a character like Karen or Ulrich or Flutter Page, and that's not going to be enough for the majority of this sort of endgame content moving forward, right? Unless you have an extreme high level of investment there. So, because it's a raid meta, whether it's Tide of Thoughts or Mains Bulletin, understanding where you want to place yourself at and make a realistic decision, right? If you've been playing for like 4 months and you decide, I'm going to be a hardcore player now, it's not something that you can do lightly, right? The amount of spending that you're going to have to do is far and away like super excessive compared to somebody else that's been playing for a lot longer, but still has been, spending to a degree and know exactly what they're spending on versus you who needs to build from the ground up. It's a very different sort of distinction that's been made there, right? So take your time with this game. This is all about the long game for this particular game, right? So in the meantime, make a realistic goal to the point where you can achieve that baseline and you can sort of sustain it, right? Think about the sort of 63 pull average, and then think about all the materials that you would have to farm for the upkeep of investing into that character and so on, right? So make an informed decision moving forward into this, right? It's not about, I have this piece, this piece, this piece, and I'll be able to tackle 500 meters or 400 meters or 300 meters or Wailing Well, right? It's not about that anymore. It's more about, can I meet the DPR requirement because of my level of understanding as well as my level of investment into that character. When this bullet point right here, reality, it's not talking about being real with yourself, right? That bullet point specifically is in regards to the landscape of the endgame content as it is right now. So starting with 3.2 and up to 3.4. So ideally, most likely 3.5 as well. We're moving into this accessible sort of endgame, sort of easy to compare, easy to analyze yourself environment. For the short term of this game, right, this is very beneficial for Blue Park. They get to make a lot of money and capitalize on the new players that they're receiving on CN side, where a lot of similar gacha games have EOS'd, where Blue Park has prevailed. In that sense, they can cash in and meet their development goals to fund their new IP or growing their staff, right? Growing their team. But for the long-term longevity and the health of this game, having these two as remain the pinnacle sort of end game content is not going to be healthy at all. People are going to lose interest extremely quickly. I would say that even in towards the end of 3.4, we're going to hear a lot of adverse sentiments being vocalized a lot more on the CN side, right? We're getting the same boss 3 times in a row, same boss twice, same boss twice. It's not really about the bosses themselves. It's just a way to compare and contrast in the grand scheme of things. And when it comes to Tide of Thoughts, it can be as complex as you make it in this mode, right? There's a lot of fun to be had in this mode, but the problem is the majority of people aren't going to push for that, right? It's going to be a big hassle. I told you about the point accruing system. The rewards remain the same as the existing Voyages Volatility shop, right? But then the difficulty is completely on another level where Voyages, you can just AFK, park your level 30 Resonance 5 character with the correct archetype lineup, and you'll be able to get 40k. This is completely the opposite of that. So I don't think that this is going to be the end all. Either they create a second iteration of the Reveries dive, or they make a new mode entirely. Giving a lot of choices is what they sort of like to preface their game design on. It's pretty apparent, giving a lot of options to cater towards the hardcore as well as the casual player base. But the thing is, now the casual and the hardcore kind of overlap in that central two environments that is Tide of Thoughts, which is very accessible, and then Mains Bulletin, which everybody knows what Mains Bulletin is, right? So I think the endgame landscape is going to change significantly moving forward. Give it about what's 2 patches worth of time. Give it about 3 months, and we're going to see a vastly different endgame content scene. They are going to have to really hook players in with this next iteration of their endgame. Otherwise, if it's something similar that we've seen before, that's when they're going to lose a lot of players there, I think. They can only retain this level of support and FOMO and this drive to push your characters and your archetypes at the expense of resources for so long before people catch on and kind of take a much more casual approach to the game or quit the game entirely, right? What this kind of serves as well for Blue Park is that because we're comparing ourselves to others, right, with these modes now, it creates a situation where a baseline is pushed forward, right? So I talked about the short-term health going this way not being great, but at the same time, a new baseline is being set where it's more easily accepted into the community that, you know, P1, yeah, okay, I'll go for P1, or P2, yeah, okay, I'll go for P2, because that's sort of like the new baseline to hit a certain DPR threshold. But as it stands, in order to release new archetypes, new characters, and have people enjoy them, the existing, you know, landscape doesn't really cut it for the sort of hardcore player base moving forward beyond 3.4, right? 3.4 up to 3.4, I think it's going to be fine. And then if it's the same thing in 3.5, then that's when problems are going to arise, right? So if you can play what you want to take away from it is, if you can play the long game, then, you know, as long as you're picking up the core essentials, that is characters like Broom, that is characters like Marsha, then you can get away with being quite frugal in how you approach this game for this particular time period. All right. What 3.5 plus will look like. So we have the collaboration that's coming up, where I would expect that that's coming out between 3.6, between the end of 3.5 and 3.7, somewhere around there. Um, they're hoping to attract as many players as possible. That's the whole purpose of a collaboration, usually, right? To get an influx of players coming in. So that's when a lot of new systems are going to be introduced, and so on. Beyond that, I've already touched on what I think is currently how they're trending and what I think will be the result going forward. Beyond, to an extent of there's going to be a new mode and it's going to be vastly different, but it's also going to be accepted as an endgame mode, right? When you think about window into the other worlds, or when you think about pre-storm protocol, people don't even know that there is a end game element to those modes because they just don't care to access it because of how excessive the time constraint is. But when something is defined off the bat as an end game mode, where there isn't like a easy barrier of entry, but it's starts off being extremely rough, then people will assume that it's going to be something new. And when that happens, we'll have to wait and see if they end up hitting the mark or not. The last statement is that I've talked in depth about, meta this, meta that, portraits. A lot of people that are listening to this, even up to now, are probably not going to care about it. It's just going to be one ear out the other kind of situation. And that's fine. Approach the game the way that you want to. This is going to be like a situation where Bluepock wants to generate as much revenue as possible, and that's reflective of their game design, their marketing, and what they're pushing, what they're recycling in 3.4 going forward, right? So we know that that's sort of where we're headed. And we know that 3.2 is laying the groundwork for that. 3.3, they experimented with ego and the family archetype, right? Having these characters be sort of mandatory in order to play this character decently or the intended way, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot more experiments to be had in that sense. If you can cut that noise out, and you can just have fun playing at P0, which is like the most, the best way to, I guess, to have fun in this game is to just not even be a spender and chase an unattainable goal, right? Initially, you reason yourself with like, oh, this is limited. I have to get it now. It's not going to come back. And then I can keep using it forever. But stick to what you have fun, whether it's chasing meta or whether it's playing a little more casually, being able to pass through all these sort of changes, right? Initially in 3.2, you're going to think, what's all the big fuss about, right? Nobody really even cares about mains bulletin, right? But then when it's reiterated in 3.3 and 3.4, that's when people are going to start to care and people are going to start to really compare and really make a sort of a ranking based system hierarchy when it comes to a character's performance, right? They're not going to inherently look at a character and think, oh, they're good for this, and I can use them in these lot of different ways. It's more just about they just suck off the bat in mains bulletin, not really incentivized to pull for it, right? If it's not strong to begin with, why bother? Kind of mentality is going to be a lot stronger as a result. So every character going forward is really going to be at a certain level of DPT, which is going to incentivize you to pull and pull and pull, right? And make sure you go back and think about the sort of things that I talked about there. Okay, I think that's pretty long as it is. I've said mostly what I wanted to say. There's probably some more nuanced stuff that I completely forgot about, but I'll try to touch back on that going forward. Okay. When it comes to the reviews, the numbers, The portrait numbers, the performance numbers, the DPT numbers, and stuff. That's going to be reflected in the actual character review. So if you were looking forward to getting like DPT numbers for Beryl and Broom and Janala and so on and Isolde, that's going to come. This was more of a overview as to what you should be thinking about, and more of a revised overview because I already gave sort of like this pull plan, right? So that's it from me. Until next time.